Let's say that you're in a debate. You declare, we should try plant-based diet for health or for the planet. They fire back, but eating meat is natural. Or you're talking about gender equality and someone says, look, men and women are different, it's genetic. Do you see the move? This is not an argument, it's a description. It feels like a mic drop, but it really doesn't answer anything. That move, the natural fallacy, shows up in debates, in marketing, and even in politics. And this is what we're going to break apart in this video. What natural even means? Why people find the word so persuasive? What philosophers like David Hume have to say about it? And finally, the one question that shuts it down immediately. 1. What is natural? Let's play a game. Is this natural? No. Is this natural? Sure. And is this natural? Kinda, yeah. This is already tricky. So what do we actually mean when we say natural? I remember that when I was a child, I used to think that natural meant something made of things that you would find in nature. Makes sense, right? So, a wooden chair, as it is made of wood, which you obviously can find in nature, would be natural. And it wouldn't matter how much the wood was transformed. But then, in high school, it hit me with my definition. Everything was in a way natural. I had just discovered chemistry, and I realized that everything just comes from natural products. We just apply more or less destructive transformations to it. A plastic chair feels totally unnatural, right? But at the end of the day, it's just oil pulled from the ground, cracked into smaller molecules, chained together, melted, and then shaped in the form of a chair. That's just nature rearranged. So, if natural means comes from nature, everything, even a plastic chair, qualifies. Then we can wonder if it's maybe a question of transformations. But here it gets tricky. Which transformation or transformations make it unnatural? Is it maybe about the number of transformations? Or a combination of both? What about soap? Is this natural? You might be surprised, but here's how natural soap is actually made. You have to mix the natural ingredients with lye, which is sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. The lye is a strong base that is obtained through an industrial process. The chemical formula of the transformation that we call saponification goes like this. Fat plus lye gives glycerin plus soap. We still call the result natural, even if it involves a chemical reaction with a non-natural ingredient. Also, the natural character of something doesn't seem to come from the thing in itself. We have a lot of examples of products that exist in both the synthetic and the natural form, but with identical molecular structure and chemical formula. Vitamin C, for example, can be found in strawberries, oranges, or bell peppers, but it can also be made synthetically from glucose. Both would be chemically identical. And since it's exactly the same chemical formula, your body would react in the same way. So I think that in the end, the definition is quite blurry, and it really depends on the public perception of things. For example, petroleum has a very bad reputation, mainly because of its environmental repercussions. Its texture, its smell, it's kind of icky in a way. And I feel, even if I didn't make polls for it, that even a slightly transformed petroleum would be seen as unnatural by people, simply because we don't like it. So, the word natural seems simple, yet the moment we try to pin it, it slips away. The thing is that this isn't even the main problem. 2. The question isn't where you think it is. So, in the previous section, we saw that the word natural is quite tricky to define. And you might expect me to stop my argumentation here, to just say, well, at the end of the day, we can't really define it, so let's not use it in argumentation. But that's not the real issue. I want to argue here that the main problem isn't that something is natural or not, but that this tells us nothing about its value. But to explain why, I need to take you to 18th century Scotland. One of my favorite philosophers, I have named the great David Hume, lived there. Hume was way ahead of his time. For example, he understood that emotions, not reason, drive human behavior. And that aligns with modern neuroscience and psychology. Why am I making this YouTube channel, remind me? Yet, in his time of the Enlightenment period, philosophers viewed reason as some sort of god and emotions as just distractions. He also was a true skeptic and empiricist, questioning the very foundations of reasoning. But what interests me here is his guillotine. Nothing bloody though, don't worry. Hume's guillotine is the statement that you can't derive an ought from an is. That is one of the classic philosophical punchlines that we hear again and again. Maybe that I hear again and again? Who knows? I'm weird. It's like Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Although, to be precise, Hume didn't exactly say this sentence, but it's a good summary of one of his thoughts. So why is it related to this video? And what does it mean? Basically, Hume noticed that philosophers of his time often wrote about descriptive claims, the is part, and then switched to a prescriptive claim, the ought part. And they did so without any justification. They say that the world is a certain way, and therefore we have to act in this way. Do you now see the connection with the natural fallacy? It's exactly the same thing. X is natural, therefore X is good. Or Y is unnatural, therefore Y is bad. But a description isn't a decision. So, to anyone who justifies something by saying that it's natural, just ask him, so what? It may be natural, but is it good for me? Is it good for society? Is it ethical? Is it just? All these questions have to be answered and can't simply be derived from the fact that it's natural. There is plenty of natural stuff that is bad and synthetic stuff that is good. We already saw that synthetic vitamin C is as good as the natural one, simply because they're identical. Another good example are vaccines. They are completely artificial. I mean, we inject ourselves with a safe version of the pathogen. This goes against every natural intuition that we can have. And yet, vaccines have saved hundreds of millions of lives and eradicated disease such as smallpox. Catching the disease outright is far more risky than taking the vaccine. So this is a clear case where something artificial is much better than our natural immune system. Another case study is iodine salt. It was introduced in the 20s when we noticed that populations far away from the sea were suffering from iodine deficiency. So we decided to artificially introduce iodine in the salt, and this drastically reduced the deficiencies in these areas. So, except if you want everybody to live by the sea, you are going to need this artificial trick. So maybe you think that artificial can be good, but natural for sure is always good. You'd be wrong, again. First, all diseases are natural and bad. You have natural disasters such as tsunamis or earthquake. I mean, it's in the name. Venomous species can be deadly, and you shouldn't eat a toxic mushroom. And even products that can be sold in supermarkets are also natural and bad. For example, raw milk can be seen as a healthy alternative, but it actually carries dangerous bacteria, and this is why we invented pasteurization. Okay, so from the previous section, we saw that the barrier between natural and artificial is quite blurry. And from this section, we saw that anyways, natural doesn't mean necessarily good. The question then is, why do we still feel that it's a good argument? 3. Why do we hold on to it? Why do we fall for the natural fallacy? Why do we feel that natural has to be better? And why does the natural industry make tons of money while often not providing better products? Short answer, we don't have a single root cause, but we have some pretty good evidence that the preference does exist and some good leads on why. In choice studies, people prefer a natural product over the chemically identical synthetic one, even after being told that they're identical. A simple label, all natural, a brown paper, or the picture of a happy farmer can nudge preferences. This bias shows up more with food than with medicine, and it varies with education, urbanization, and trust in science. Teaching that two items are chemically identical reduces the bias by about a third, but it doesn't kill it. So what's driving it? Nothing has been proven yet, but we do have some cues. It could be a purity contamination instinct. We evolved to avoid pathogens. Our disgust alarm fires at rot, dirt, bodily fluid, or even unknown handling. This is great for avoiding human contamination, but not good for judging vaccines. Affect and fluency. Natural, simple, familiar. Feels safe and is easy to process. Synthetic or modified feels complex and risky. So the feeling wins, it's not rational. We just don't want to take the risk. Essentialism. We feel that natural things have a pure essence. Change it and you ruin what it is. This is why a lot of people believe in homeopathy, even at high dilutions where there is statistically no molecule of the product left. They think that the water carries the substance, essence, or memory. Teleology. This is my favorite one. We think that nature is for something. Clouds are here so it can rain. Fruits are here so we can safely eat them. It's a purpose-first habit of mind. We feel that nature is well done in general, that things happen for a reason, and that a man in his natural environment should strive. We think that the world is made for us and that we shouldn't interfere with it too much. Studies show that a lot of us have this simplistic bias, such as the ozone layer is here to protect us. These biases have probably been reinforced by naive interpretations of monotheistic religions. We think that God has made this world for us, so we just shouldn't change it too much. But even committed atheists sometimes still have this bias. And I personally think that whether or not you believe in God, you shouldn't treat the world as if it was made for you. If you're an atheist, you basically believe that there is no purpose in this world. So I want to say, assume your atheism and don't hold this theological framework. And even if you practice religion, I still think that you should give up on it. For example, in Judaism, that I know the best, we believe that men have to work for this world. As my rabbi says, we don't eat wheat, we eat the bread, the transformed product. So our preference for the natural isn't rational. It's built from instincts, mental shortcuts, and culture. That explains why we fall for it. But here's the danger. When we let these instincts shape our debates, we start to fight in the wrong direction. For the fight isn't where you think it is. My main problem with the natural fallacy isn't that nature versus nurture intermingle. It's also not that there are no true natural products. My problem is that we deduce that this natural product or phenomenon is better. And I think that this makes so many debates go in the wrong direction. Let's take some example so you understand what I want to say. Example 1. Same-sex relationship. When we talk about homosexuality, a common debate is whether or not it's natural. From what I could read, it seems to be the case, but this really is irrelevant to the moral or the legal question. It could have been the case that, in a certain sense, homosexuality wasn't natural. Yet, we could decide as a society that as long as people don't hurt each other and there is consent, we can allow for any sexual behavior, no matter how unnatural it is. But some people who want to defend the rights of homosexuals try to defend this idea that it's natural, while the debate, for me, really isn't there. In this case, it's fine, because it seems that homosexuality is indeed natural. But let's take another case, where I think that activists are shooting themselves in the foot. Feminism. Or more precisely, the cognitive differences between men and women. Example 2. Sex differences. In this case, it happens that men and women, on average of course, have different psychologies. And this in a natural way, not just because of society. It actually makes a lot of sense from the viewpoint of evolutionary psychology. This field of science tries to understand psychology based on the evolutionary pressures that happens to our ancestors. And it happens that men and women have had different challenges in their evolutionary paths. For example, women are more easily discussed than men. I know, it's a cliché, but it seems to be true on average. Why? Because women carry babies. And during pregnancy, both the woman and the baby are more at risk of developing sickness. So it makes sense for women to be more easily discussed, because this disgust will trigger some sanitizing of the environment more often and more deeply than for men. And this will prevent the woman and the babies to be in contact with the pathogens. Another example, more controversial, is the one of violence. It won't surprise anyone, but on average men are more violent than women. The thing is that this is in part genetic. In ancestral settings, male reproductive success depended on the status, competition, and mate access. Traits that nurtured risk-taking and physical aggression were selected. Don't get me wrong, culture has for sure reinforced the cliché of the strong, violent man and the reserved, shy woman. But this was just an emphasis on a natural divide between men and women. Sometimes I say that this is like Coke. Did Coca-Cola invent the taste of sugar? Of course it didn't. This is a biological adaptation that enabled us to look for sweet food in our environments. But Coca-Cola did have a heavy marketing that made it cool to drink it. So, as all things, traits evolve from an interaction between genes and environment. Quite often, marketing teams play on these already existing differences and they just push it further. So I'm quite sad to see that so many people are trying to defend the right of women by denying the sex differences. It makes no sense. You don't need that. You could perfectly say that yes, men are more violent, and this in a natural way. Yet this doesn't excuse anything. They should still go to prison if they commit a crime, obviously. You can also say that men are more risk-taking, but it's perfectly okay for women to do a risky sport. It's like if people were trying to fight racism by saying that there are no differences of color between individuals. That would be dumb and pretty obviously false. The right thing to say is yes, there are differences of colors between individuals, but no, this doesn't mean that some get to sit in the front of the bus and others in the back. I could go on for hours, like when sometimes I say that our current wealth distribution is unjust. See my video on inheritance, someone would retort that economic inequalities are natural. That the world is just unfair, that's the way it is. Don't get fooled by these arguments. The world is the way it is, but society is the way we make it. Yet, there might still be something to take from this fallacy. 5. When nature does say something about what ought to be. So far, I've been tearing down the natural fallacy. But let's be fair, there are cases where paying attention to natural does give us some good cues about whether this thing is good. As we saw, this natural fallacy is here for a reason. Nature has a sense of sanctity, purity, familiarity, and simplicity. And this has some value. For example, we are more often drawn towards natural fruits than a fruit-flavored snack, at least when you're not American. And this makes sense. We have eaten fruits for most of our evolutionary past, while we started to eat industrial food very recently. So our biology hasn't caught up with it yet. Products that are heavily transformed are usually worse for our health. Our body is a machine that was built for food that was there for millennia. So, for food at least, a natural first prior could be a good heuristic, but it's not a rule. About sanctity, I think that this notion is getting more and more absent in our societies, and I think this is a shame. Philosophers from Durkheim to Charles Taylor argue that societies that lack this sense of sanctity can drift toward nihilism or hyper-instrumentalism. Empirically, cultures with strong purity taboos devote more land to these untouchable grooves, creating unintended biodiversity reserves. Anthropological work shows that tight purity codes correlates with group longevity and cooperation in communes and religious sects. As all things, sanctity can obviously also backfire, like expulsions and stigmas. But I think that it's interesting to see that this seemingly useless concept at the individual level does show some benefits at the more community level. Also, if a behavior is partly biological, we can for sure condemn it, but we should still see some friction when trying to suppress it. For example, men and women choose different careers, partly because of culture, of course, but also partly because of genetic inclinations. We could think that this is bad, and that a perfect world would have 50% of men and 50% of women in literally every field. Yet we know that there is a natural inclination towards certain jobs based on gender. See the gender equality paradox, for example. So, it will be hard to get to this 50-50 state in literally every field. So, my guess is that maybe it's not worth pursuing it. I think that it's important to provide equal opportunities to everyone, men and women, but we shouldn't strive for exactly 50-50 repartition. Bottom line, what matters is that you should wonder why we prefer natural in certain scenarios. Maybe there are some good reasons for it, like the fact that we have been eating fruits so our body is good at absorbing it. But maybe there are no good reasons, like when the synthetic formula is exactly the same as the natural one. 6. Recap and conclusion. First, we discovered that the word natural is more slippery than it seems. Plastic is just rearranged oil, vitamin C can be made synthetically and is exactly identical to the natural one, and raw honey is a biochemical jungle. So the label alone tells us close to nothing. Second, we met my friend, David Hume, and his famous warning that you cannot get an ought from an is. Earthquake and cyanide plants are perfectly natural. Vaccines and hip replacement are artificial. Yet the benefit goes the opposite way. Third, we asked why the natural equal good fallacy still grabs us. It's a stack of mental shortcut, teleology, fear of contamination, and essentialism, supercharged with clever marketing. Teaching science trims the bias, but it never kills it. Fourth, we saw how some debates go off track when they try to focus on naturalness. Whether homosexuality, gender gap, or income inequality are natural or not tells us nothing about their desirability. Biology explains tendencies, ethics decides norms. And finally, we admitted that this instinct isn't worthless. Fruits usually beat ultra-processed sugar bombs, and shared purity rules can bind communities and even protect forests. Nature sometimes hints at what works, but it never gives the final verdict. So, next time you are facing a natural fallacy, remember these words. Nature describes, ethics decides.